Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world with self-care strategies from Chinese medicine. I'm your host, Brodie Welch, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Before we jump into today's show, I'd like to extend to you an invitation to be coached by me for free. All you need to do is send in your question to Brodie@BrodieWelch.com. That's Brodie with an I-E and Welch with a C-H, Brodie@BrodieWelch.com. And let me know what your biggest struggle is right now regarding your mindset, your habits, your digestion or elimination or hormones or sleep or energy or whatever it is that you are struggling with respect to your health, your happiness, or your personal evolution. All the things that I know something about and would love to help you with. Because if you're dealing with it and you bother to write in and tell me about it, it's likely that that's going to help at least 100 other people who are wondering the exact same thing, but who are not going to act on it. So if you're ready for some one-on-one coaching, send in your question and I will choose one and air it on the podcast to be shared with our wonderful, loving, and supportive Healthy Curiosity audience. And if you're ready for some coaching and you don't want it aired publicly, you really belong in my Level Up group. So check it out at BrodieWelch.com. Okay, now for today's show. Welcome to today's show. I'm your host, Brodie Welch, and today we're going to be talking about how the heck an average white guy from Connecticut found himself in the middle of nowhere in the Amazon tracking down indigenous medicine men with promising cures and interventions. My guest is Nick Polizzi, who has spent his career directing and producing feature-length documentaries that explore the power of traditional medicine. His quest for ancient cures has taken him around the world into remote cultures that still practice these fast-disappearing methods. Nick's current role as the founder of The Sacred Science stems from a calling to honor, preserve, and protect the knowledge and rituals of the indigenous peoples of the world. Nick, I'm really excited to have you as a guest here on A Healthy Curiosity. Welcome.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
So, how did an average white guy from Connecticut find himself in the middle of nowhere in the Amazon? I'd love to know what led you to your life's work.
It's a long and tangled tale. It started with me getting sick when I was in my early 20s. I was leading a pretty normal life. I just gotten out of business school / design school. And I was living in New York City, just kind of doing what you normally do when you get out of school, trying to get a job, drinking a lot, running or chasing girls around, whatever it was that I was doing. And that was sort of what my life seemed to be. And then one day I got a really severe migraine headache, and that kind of changed everything. I went from being able to be functional in public and in a job setting to being once or twice a week having to be like laid up in my house with the lights off, with the temperature down to like 60 degrees and no sound for 9 to 10 hours in agony. I don't know if you've ever had an ocular migraine headache before, but they're epic. They're crazy. And they can't, for me, I'd never had one before. They came out of nowhere, and it's not like just getting a headache where you take an Advil and it goes away, or you just kind of deal with it throughout the day. Like this is like the feeling of a bone breaking almost in your brain, essentially, for a long duration of time.
It is one of the most debilitating things. I fortunately have not had one myself, but I certainly treat them in my clinic, and I've seen people close to me suffering with them. And yeah, it is brutal. And to be taken out, sidelined like that when you're in your 20s, when you're young, when you're capable, and then to feel like this was happening to you on a weekly basis.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Sometimes it would happen twice a week.
Wow. That sounds miserable.
Yeah. So, it's not like certainly there are more serious illnesses. So I'm not saying that this is the most serious thing that could happen to a person. But for me, I went from being healthy, footloose and fancy free to all of a sudden twice a week. Sometimes it would be me just in absolute agony for 2 days. And it forced me to have to start looking at my health, which I had never done before. And so I started off I have a family on my mom's side. I come from a family of nurses. And so I had access to some of the best neurologists in Connecticut and New York. And they all recommended that I go on these drugs. I was on a couple different types of them. and they would work a little bit and then they would stop working. And so basically after about a year of going on and off different kinds of drugs and getting MRIs and just doing all that stuff, they said that they would have to start putting me on a preventative drug that would change my moods. And then that was sort of where I got off the bus. I was like, I guess I have to find another way, because I can't go through life without being able to feel and sense what's going on around me. So that was where I turned to natural medicine. That was where I was like, okay, there has to be something else besides this then.
Yeah. And that sounds like a really familiar path. I mean, like a lot of times people's first choice is not to seek a holistic, complicated solution, which could involve changing. I mean, who wants to change their diet, really? Like, who wants to look at their shadow issues? Like there is all this stuff to holistic medicine that requires much more effort than taking a pill. And it's not necessarily an easy path. Or, people are like, well, I hate needles, and to which my response is, well, like there is, you just must not be in quite enough pain yet, because It's like, it's just nothing compared to what people suffer with. And as anyone who gets acupuncture knows, it's actually quite relaxing and lovely. But in any case, it sounds like there was a point at which it didn't make sense for you to do the conventional options. And so what happened then?
So then I started working with my diet, and I started working with different types of Chinese medicine and sort of these hybrids. So there's a hybrid method that I'm sure you've heard of called EFT or tapping.
Love it. Yeah.
That really helped me a lot. What it really came down to was a combination of me releasing some trauma from my childhood, which really brought up a lot of other spiritual and otherworldly type, I guess, moments of awareness for me. And it was a combination of that and also changing my diet. It turns out I can't drink coffee. It turns out that gluten's bad. I just can't handle the gluten. I mean, once I eliminated coffee, gluten, and then did some tapping, this is maybe about 2 or 3 months after I decided to walk away from modern medicine, then I had decreased my headaches by at least 90 to 95%. And then within a year, they were completely gone. So that was epic. I mean, because that was, it's just having that experience of being told by just about every doctor that I spoke with, especially and including these like Ivy League neurologists, saying, "Hey, sorry, this is your sentence. This is what you have, and this is all that you'll ever be able to do. And here are the options for you." To like then just being like, I'm just going to start sensing what my body needs and experimenting with some of these wacky alternative type modalities and just see, because I'm out of sheer desperation. I mean, it's really. Would never have done it. I would never have gotten into natural medicine if it wasn't for that. But then just realizing how much there was that was out there and that was effective, and that within 2 or 3 months of leaving modern medicine behind and working with alternatives, I was pretty much fully cured. It's been probably a good decade since I've had anything resembling a migraine headache.
Beautiful. I mean, really, like there's so much beauty and wonderful life-saving power that quote unquote modern chemical medicine or surgical medicine has to offer us, or diagnostics. Like there's a lot there. And yet, why do you think that these super smart people have these obvious blind spots when it comes to what actually works? I mean, because what you're talking about is like you had option A, which was treat the symptom for the rest of your life to a great detriment of your ability to perceive the world accurately, right? Something that was going to mess with your moods and perceptions, versus taking it upon yourself to quit coffee, gluten, and do some tapping. So for those who are not familiar with tapping, we have talked about it a little bit on the show in the past, but emotional freedom technique, or EFT, is basically that tapping rhythmically on various acupoints that are designed to help the brain kind of file past trauma differently, or to just kind of rewire things a little bit so that we have different relationship to those early beliefs that get planted there in childhood, or whatever sort of stories we may be telling ourselves. It helps to kind of break that mind body, the way that it's showing up in your body, and to kind of rewrite the program a bit. So it can be a really powerful technique. But all of these things speak to changing the operating system of your body, as opposed to kind of just deleting a file over and over again, which is kind of what you had been doing. I mean, to me, it speaks to a paradigm difference, right? Just a different model of health. What's your take?
For my situation, so it was diet related and sort of some energy medicine. That kind of made the biggest difference. I've got a bunch of friends who are doctors. I deeply appreciate modern medicine. I could go off on a long tangent about the fact that we had to have an emergency C-section for my first son. So we had planned this whole tub birth. We were totally hippie, natural path, completely looking down upon anybody who would ever even consider a C-section. Then, of course, what does the universe deliver to us is like, oh, well, guess what? Your tub birth, you need to have an emergency C-section because, he's not doing so great. So I totally appreciate modern medicine. I believe heavily in shamanism and traditional medicines. I'm not saying that modern medicine shouldn't be used. I think
it certainly has its place. And yet, there is this blind spot, right? There is this blind spot about what is possible.
Yeah. So I think that for me, there's two things that happened that are indicative of something that I think is a blind spot of modern medicine. So the diet part. I've got plenty of friends who are doctors, and I think you get less than 2 or 3 hours of nutrition in your entire education to be a doctor.
Yeah, my friends say 3 hours. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's a pretty epic thing right there. So if we want to get really granular about it, the fact that diet is not considered. So you might as well say there's no education. There's nothing. That's 2 or 3 hours. Who really remembers that in their their course of however many years you're going to med school? So the idea that food could be affecting my migraines was definitely not even considered by the neurologist that I was speaking with. So the idea that coffee could be a factor, and people still don't believe it. Like I say coffee, and they're like, but wait, coffee is supposed to be good for you and you get headaches. It helps to dilate, your blood vessels and all that stuff. How could that be? But literally, if I have 5 cups of coffee, over the next week, then I will start getting a little bit hazy and the sensation that I used to get before migraine started kicking in. And then if I continue to, because I've done this before, I thought I had the right coffee. Oh, I'll drink bulletproof don't worry, it's going to be fine. I will get a migraine within a month of that.
And the reason, Chinese medicine would explain that very easily, right? Like, yes, there's this biomechanical or there's biological properties to the components of coffee, right? There's the whatever's in the plant that makes it have the effects that it does on the body. But there's also its energetics, right? Whether the fact that it's warming, the fact that it's oily, the fact that it's nervous system activating, and that it tends to move upward, So I think coffee is a very powerful drug. Women with menstrual cramps, things like that, or breast tenderness, it is amazing how fast those things go away when they quit coffee, because it's more than just the component parts that we can identify and study and that we can isolate in labs. It's the energetic effect of this herb and what it does to your ecosystem. And so, as you were saying, if you were to have it 5 days in a row, it's okay, subtle effect upon subtle effect. And then it's it ramps up to a level where it meets a threshold where the symptom is going to be clear. And so there is something more to food and to what goes into our mouths than what we can quantify and measure in terms of the macros and micronutrients. There's the energetics and the temperatures and what that does to how energy flows in the body. So yeah, I have zero problem believing that coffee was related to your migraines.
We're delving pretty deeply into Chinese medicine for this upcoming docuseries that we're releasing. And so I've got a couple of different Chinese medicine practitioners, Chinese herbalists who have been saying something that really dovetails with what you just said about, and specifically with me, how I think I have liver yang rising.
Yeah, that's often how we explain a migraine, that idea of the energy moving upwards, usually along the gallbladder channel, which means the side of the head, which means behind the eye, which means the neck and shoulders, that it's so often in liver, gallbladder, or this husband and wife team that work together. And so coffee absolutely is a liver stimulant. So could that be medicine for some people? Absolutely. Could it be poison if you have liver yang rising tendencies? Absolutely. It's all very bio-individual.
But I never even, I've been delving into this for a while, and this is still pretty new to me. This particular concept in Chinese medicine, I'm like, oh, wait a second, that's completely, that overlay fits me like a glove. That is, I do have it. And then I start reading about it. I'm like, oh, all of those things that you would experience with liver yang rising, it's amazing. So we can go off on a tangent there, but I'm not going to. I'm going to stay on topic. The other thing that I would say about my own recovery that is indicative of a blind spot in modern medicine is just the fact that there was trauma related to this condition. When I released a couple substantial pieces of childhood trauma, I was tapping during a couple different migraines I had with my buddy Nick Ortner, who runs Tapping Solution, and is an EFT expert. And they were literal, in the middle of my agony, he'd be like, nope, this is when we should be tapping. Let's do it. Let's use EFT now. And there were these insane shifts that happened right in the middle of, I don't want to call it a migraine attack, because that just kind of, I don't like to look at anything as positive or negative anymore. But this, during the experience, it was amazing to me how visiting these places that I had never thought were that relevant, but then realized they were deeply relevant, how much of a shift that created. So I don't think there's really a place for that in modern medicine. I think that there's this very, I don't want to say Cartesian, but there's this idea that the matters of the soul, the matters of the spirit are not really relevant and are probably not really existent at all. It's, they treat the body as if it's this machine. They don't think about it as this complex entanglement of energies, or like, this interweaving of different layers of yourself. It's really more of like you're a piece of, not a piece of meat, but kind of like that,
That's precisely the analogy I use in my basics of Chinese medicine course, is like, are you a sack of meat or a living river of energy that's changing all the time, right?
Yeah.
Like, pick your model. And the idea that emotional trauma only is relevant to things like depression or anxiety, when we know that that's crazy town, right? Like, we know that there is no condition of our emotions or a mental state that doesn't have a corresponding state for the physical body. It's like, it still blows me away that this research is in allopathic medicine. It's been there for decades, but it's still really it's not something that the culture is really embracing or comfortable with at this point. No. as a whole.
But as we all get sick, I think that's the blessing. Honestly, that's the blessing. And to jump fast forward to Amazon healing, like, there's this idea in the Amazon that diseases are mothers. Literally, there's a tribe we work with that considers diseases to be mothers. The thinking being that when you get sick with something, that's the disease mother becoming impregnated with you. And so if you stay in the womb and you learn all the lessons that she has to teach you, then she'll rebirth you into the world as a healthy, brand new, and much wiser being.
Oh, that's such a cool model. And in Chinese medicine, just the metaphor of like, we nourish the mother to nourish the child. This is an axiom that we have. Of course, it's like that. The context of that is thinking about the organ systems in the creation cycle, the idea that each organ system feeds its energy to the next one around the circle. But that idea of like, if you pay attention to the clues of your disease and you can learn the lessons of it, the potential to be released from it is, that's a really cool way of looking at it.
Yeah.
So I want to hear more about this Amazon healing stuff. So you went down and you worked with traditional healers in the Amazon. So tell me about that. What was that experience like? How long were you there? What did you learn? Yeah, I want to hear the highlights.
So I make documentaries. That's what I started doing after I healed myself of migraines. I wanted to film this stuff. I was kind of an artist and photographer on the side when I was doing all of my business stuff. And then when I healed myself using EFT, then my friend Nick and I were like, we should make a film about EFT tapping. So the first film I made was all about tapping. Then I got into nutrition. So the second film I was a part of was called Simply Raw: Reversing Diabetes in 30 Days Using Raw Veganism. Once I did that, I was deeply called, after working with both of these films and the subject matter, to go into the more ancient origins of healing. And I guess that's because behind closed doors, when we were interviewing these experts, a lot of them, when I asked them, it's a question I'd always ask. And it's funny, I've never mentioned this on the interview before, but the question I'd always asked was who their teacher was. So we were sitting there with Jack Canfield, and we do this Jack Canfield interview. Jack Canfield is one of the big guys from The Secret, and a bunch of other people from The Secret. At that point, The Secret was the big movie, so we were trying to interview a lot of those folks. I'd ask them who their teachers were, and it seemed like at least half the time they would say, my teacher is someone who you'll never meet, because he either lives in the middle of nowhere in India, or he's a medicine man from here, or he's from the Maya or whatever. So I was like, wait a second. So these guys, who are pretty much these white older men who are talking about matters of the spirit, are really learning from, a lot of times, from indigenous people who are not appearing in front of a camera and are often not getting the credit that they deserve. So I was like, who are these people? What are these practices? And that is how I stumbled upon shamanism. That was how I started delving into native healing traditions. And shamanism is at the core of a lot of different native healing traditions. And that led me down to the Amazon. Started going down to the Amazon, and it was epic. It was incredible. It was amazing. So in order to get access to these traditions and to get to earn the trust of shamans who knew that I was going to be filming, or my intention was to come down there and bring patients. Because in all the movies we had made before, we always use real patients. We bring 8 patients who are going to try tapping to heal themselves. We have 7 diabetics who are going to use raw food to try to heal their diabetes. So my thing was, let's bring 8 people from around the world who have different illnesses, really substantial, really serious illnesses, because we're crazy. And we just decided that we were going to go all or nothing and try to bring people, who were really desperate down to the Amazon. So let's bring 8 people down to the Amazon and see if they can heal themselves using ancient indigenous shamanic medicines. So these guys knew that was my intention. So before they trusted me, I had to kind of go through a bunch of different rites of passage and initiations, and so they could, quote unquote, like see me and understand what my intentions were down there.
That makes sense, right? I mean, you don't just want to set yourself up for global exploitation. Like you could be opening a Pandora's box. Like this white dude wants to come, share with the world what I'm doing. It's like, what does he really want? What is he after?
That's it. It's totally true. And it's still something that I struggle with all the time, because since we made that movie, it has blown up. It's been seen by millions and millions of people. And I think that we do a pretty good job of being a steward of this information and giving back to the traditions that we work with, and also just making sure people understand that they don't need to go to the Amazon to get this kind of healing, to have these kinds of breakthroughs. But at the same time, it is a very delicate region of the world, and they definitely wanted to put me to the test. So that was a pretty big part of it, was sitting in ceremonies that are pretty intense and understanding what happens when the reality is, it is kind of pulled away from you for a while.
I definitely want to circle back to the DIY. Like, we don't actually have to go to the Amazon to do these kinds of experiences. I definitely want to go there. But could you tell us a little bit about what you experienced? Like, what were the rites and rituals? Like, I mean, are we talking like ayahuasca ceremonies or sweat lodges, or like what are you doing?
All those things have been a part of my life for the last 7 or 8 years. The best way to start for me talking about ceremonies is just to get an understanding of what a ceremony is and what a ceremony usually entails. I think that people, when they hear the word ceremony, a lot of times their mind immediately, especially these days, goes to some psychoactive plant brew that you're going to be taking and sent on some crazy cosmic journey. And I think in some ways, maybe that'll happen sometimes, but things like you just mentioned, sweat lodge and temescal and hot and cold type things, even really intense fasting, is just as meaningful and just as difficult. So I think that for me, when I think about ceremonies and I think about rites of passage in these traditions, whether that be in the Central America, South America, Africa, Australia, one thing that they all have in common is there's this intentional entry into an intense environment. So ayahuasca, you drink ayahuasca, it's going to shatter reality as you know it. And, is that psychedelic? Maybe. Is it deeply spiritual and meaningful? That's the way I look at it. One thing that I know for sure is that you're voluntarily stepping into intensity. So sweat lodge is the same thing.
Yeah, like I volunteer to be uncomfortable for the sake of growth. It's really about embracing an edge, right?
I had a dream last night. It's funny. Like I don't think I've ever had a dream this way. But I had a dream last night about an ayahuasca ceremony, and I remember the same feeling of like just dread in the dream. Before the ceremony, because that's how it always is. Some people think that it's like this recreational thing, like, oh yeah, go down and take ayahuasca, or go sit in a San Pedro ceremony or a peyote ceremony. These things are intense. Like, it's not like having a few glasses of wine or smoking some marijuana or whatever people tend to do for recreation using substances. It's not like that. It's much more of a trial. It's a test. It rattles you down to your core. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is I've been in sweat lodges that are just as intense, if not even more intense than the most intense ayahuasca ceremonies I've been in. But the places that I go into both of those types of ceremonies, they tend to be the same. It's basically you just learning how to be okay in extreme discomfort and surrender to the fact that, your ego and your physical body is not all that's going on here, that there is a deeper part of you, that there is this spirit side or your energy side, this part of you that doesn't really tend to get spoken about in your high school science book. I think that what I look at as ceremonies is this experience that is going to bring you into complete communion with the real you, the thing that is beyond the name. Like, a lot of people still think that they're their name. I ask people who they are. I ask people who they are. They say, "Oh, I'm Tom." Well, okay, Tom. What else are you? What else is going on there? Well, I'm a carpenter. Okay, I get it. So you've given me like this word that that was slapped on you before you were born.
Or who you are in a different context, right? Like, oh, I'm a friend, I'm a mother, I'm a brother, I'm a,
Mhm.
I'm a carpenter. That like we are these different things in these different contexts, but clearly that's like none of those contexts are the entirety of our
That's it.
identity as a drop in the ocean of consciousness, as
Yeah, yeah.
something.
Whatever spiritual metaphor. I mean, all those things. Like, how do you handle that? Like for me, going into these ceremonies, especially being someone who was coming from this kind of New York City kind of moving and shaking environment, and then all of a sudden being thrown into these ceremonies that were like meant to make you. I had tried recreational drugs in college before. I thought I thought I had it all figured out. Like, yeah, this is fine, but I'd never worked with plants that were meant to take you to your edge and like make you look at who you really are. That was a big wake up call to me. And although it was painful at first, it was extremely beneficial. It changed everything for me. It helped me better understand my reality and better understand what I was actually here to do in this life. That was what I got when I started working with those shamans. And the first ayahuasca ceremony I sat in was I was either lucky or unlucky enough to be sitting with a very experienced group of people. And I think that was maybe the intention behind, the shaman had for this particular ceremony was that this was a very experienced group of people. So it was a particularly strong dose of ayahuasca. So that was definitely a challenge for me, but it was something that it hurled me down the path. And I could talk about that, but it's like, it's a long story. I just know that I came out the other side with some very powerful tools that I've still used to this day that if in the moment felt like they were like survival tools. They were tools that I needed to kind of use that I was first of all grasping for. I didn't even know that I had them, but I was grasping for it in the middle of the ceremony to try to be okay because I thought I was I thought I was dead in the middle of the ceremony, or that I was about to die, and that there was going to be some kind of a terrible outcome to this experience. And throughout the night, like I found these tools, these places in myself that I never knew were there that I could go to become resourceful in the discomfort. And I came out the other side, I don't want to say a brand new person, but I certainly was wiser and more mature and I guess evolved on my own path than I think I ever could have been doing something else. I mean, it was like a 24-hour period. And the next day I felt like I knew more about who I actually was and what this reality was and what my purpose on this earth was than I had ever come close to understanding before that had happened. So
What a gift to be able to get a clearer sense of who you are and the reality of your potential and what you could be capable of. That strikes me as not only healing on a certain level, but just in terms of an infusion of potential, which seems more like aspirational and helping you achieve some level of destiny or some level of purpose rather than just overcoming illness. Use that in quotation marks. But I'm curious too about the experiences of the super sick people that you brought with you, or like to film this documentary. What kinds of healing did you see?
oh man, so much happened down there. Just to start off, I brought three different patients with cancer, one person with advanced neuroendocrine cancer, one person with advanced breast cancer, and a gentleman from Australia with prostate cancer. There was a woman named Nicola who had Parkinson's disease, someone with Crohn's disease, someone with the irritable bowel syndrome, really, really advanced irritable bowel syndrome, the person with drug addiction, depression, and the person with diabetes. So the way that we start the movie off is also the way that something we mentioned in the beginning of my new book is 5 people come back with real healing results and 2 people come back disappointed and 1 person doesn't come back at all. We sort of acknowledge in the beginning, and I of course acknowledge to this day that not everybody experienced some amazing healing breakthrough, but a lot of them did. Although not everyone experienced an amazing healing breakthrough, every single one of them, and this is not just in my words, this is in their words, had an incredible spiritual awakening. So they were completely different in terms of their relationship to this world and to themselves and to their family and to whatever they might be struggling with. In terms of physical breakthroughs, I mean, there's so many different ones to talk about. I guess I could talk about our Parkinson's patient, Nicola. She had Parkinson's that was so severe, I guess is an okay way to put it, that even though she was from England, you couldn't tell that she had an English accent because she sort of like her jaw was so clenched, and like she had such a hard time moving around and such limited ability with her muscles and with just her basic mobility, that it was hard for her to get around. It was hard for her to talk. It was hard for her to really be a human being. The way she was when she got there to about 2 weeks later, when she started working with a couple different plants, one being an extremely powerful plant that really should not be trifled with or used by anyone who's not a specialist. It's called Toe, and it's the Brugmansia grandiflora plant. It's a relative of Datura, which is a very psychoactive compound that you see in Hindu iconography because it's a revered plant that was used by the ancient mystics in that culture as well. But this is a
quite poisonous too, right?
Like very. So there's teacher plants and there's power plants. Like the so the ayahuasca, even though it's intense, is considered to be a teacher plant because as bad as it can get, it'll never kill you, and as bad as it can get, it'll never make you go insane, or it'll never make you go blind.
Well, it's reassuring. There are limits to what it's gonna screw with your sense of self, and it's gonna knock your whole world apart for a little while, but you're not gonna die. And
but that really is. It really is. I mean, even in the middle of it, sometimes you forget that you forget that that's part of it. You're like, but I don't know. Maybe this time, maybe I'll be the one. But no, it's really just that kind of a plant. It's not. And when you hear about these deaths that have happened, there's been one or two of them that have happened over the last 5 years as ayahuasca has kind of grown in the public eye. When you look into what was going on, there's other things mixed into it. It's not just, there's two components to ayahuasca. There's the Banisteriopsis caapi vine, which is a vine that grows in the jungle. And then there's a leafy plant called chacruna. Those two things need to be combined. And then you have ayahuasca if it's prepared the right way. But there's other things that can be added in. So people who have had a hard time and, even serious hard times on certain ayahuasca brews, when they look at the brew itself, there's other things. And oftentimes Toe, which is what I'm talking about, has been mixed in. Sometimes, I've had it with that mixed in too. It's actually kind of common for that to be thrown in a little bit. Like they'll put a tiny little pinch into a gigantic pot of ayahuasca just to kind of give it some kind of a signature or like some kind of a, I don't know, spiritual kick. But anyway, so Nicola was working with our Parkinson's patient. She was making some progress using some of the other herbs. Like there's one called chirisanango, which is it means 1,000 needles in Quechua, because it actually, you drink this plant and it's literally like having thousands of needles. It's basically like plant acupuncture. I mean, it's like you have it and it's like 1,000 cold needles are being like poked into your body. So they use it for things like Parkinson's to help stimulate.
Wow. Right. Where you would want that.
That's it.
Stimulation.
You're wanting to kind of like, you want your, it's a neurological disorder. So you want your nervous system to be activated. But so, it was working. It wasn't working great. She was making progress. It wasn't fast progress. So Roman and another shaman named Habin, who works with Toe, said, hey, there is a thing that's used here for Parkinson's. It's something that Habin had used a few different times recently and had great success with a few Parkinson's patients, and it was Toe. But he's like, listen, this is a power plant. It's not a teacher plant. If it's not used the right way, if she has an adverse reaction, it can kill her. And so it was one of the many little thresholds we had to cross during this like 40-day, experience in the jungle. Was like, okay, Nicola, what do you think? And she's like, I will do anything to get my life back. She has 2 young boys, and she's like, I'll do anything to get my life back. So she started working with this power plant, and her and Habin were I remember like they went up into her hut for like 2 days, and they were working with this power plant together. And the next 2 days later, she walked out of her hut, and she was like just like jumping and walking, and like she was talking with an English accent, like without any kind of like tenseness in her jaw. It was like this elegant like movie star type English accent, and I'm like, what? Like we filmed it all too. It's in the movie. So it was insane. That was like one of those ones where, there are plenty of really powerful healing results that our patients experienced. I could rattle off a bunch of them right now, but I don't want to spoil the movie or spoil the book. But this was just one of those things where we were all just like watching. It was just too much. It was too much to understand. This woman who like could barely move was like going for a walk and like talking to us in this and being silly and like just joking around. And it was like, this is the woman who was trapped inside that body for that long, you know?
That is incredible. Remind us what the movie and the book are called.
So the movie's called The Sacred Science. I have a new book out. It's called The Sacred Science as well. The Sacred Science, an Ancient Healing Path for the Modern World. It just published on Tuesday, April 3rd. It's available everywhere.
Oh, congratulations. Wonderful.
Yeah.
As a final wrap-up question, I want to circle back to that. What could we do short of the journey that you took to the Amazon to step outside our typical sense of who we are for the potential of healing? What's the best way we can do that without necessarily going too far from home?
So I have 2 kids. And I thought before I had kids that I had experienced probably what was the most intense thing I'd ever have to experience in terms of like challenging my understanding of myself and this reality. But I was wrong. Children really were, for me, the strongest medicine that there is, stronger than ayahuasca, stronger than a sweat lodge, because they're mirrors for you. So I mentioned that only because I think that there is this belief, and it's a very mistaken belief, that we need to go somewhere else to have our spiritual experience or to work on ourselves, quote unquote. And what I've learned, and what we talk about a lot in my book, is that this work needs to be done right here, right now. It's not about going somewhere else to have the experience or waiting until yoga class to kind of go and like, you know, have your unwinding happen. Like what I've been taught by the shamans is that this world is a spiritual training ground. Every second of it is. And it's just about whether or not you want to look at it through that lens or if you want to be asleep. So in terms of what we can do to step into intensity, step outside our comfort zone, and really work on ourselves and evolve as these light beings that we are, I think it's really just about sitting in the moment and understanding all the lessons that are sitting there waiting to be taught to you by your immediate reality. I have this for a long time. I've had this thing where I when I come out of the jungle, I sometimes get sad because I come back. I know that only the teachings I've received and this understanding of like the way of being, like this direct, instead of letting your thoughts be this thing that kind of defines your reality, understanding how to interface directly with your reality without having to even think about what it is, but just understanding what's in front of you. That's the way of like shamanism. That's the way that people walk through the jungle. It's the way that healers interface with their patients. They don't let their thoughts form these illusions about what they're seeing in front of them. They can see right through the illusion at all times. It's easy to be that way when you're down in the jungle. It's harder to be that way when you're coming back to New York City. So I always have these kind of periods of like, sadness when I'm leaving the jungle. I'm like, oh, how long will this last? But recently, I mean, literally probably the last 2 or 3 years, it's changed for me substantially because of this understanding, this idea that, it's a little bit easier to go to the jungle and have this kind of stuff happen because you're sort of away from your family, you're away from your life, you're away from all the patterns that you've kind of grown up in and all the patterns that are there waiting for you to untangle when you get back. I think the real work is for us to show up in the moment. And this isn't like an original thought. There's plenty of other cultures that talk about this too, but I think it's easier said than done. And I think the real challenge is to sit there, center yourself, and try to understand what your blind spots are in that moment, and do whatever it takes to dissolve those blind spots. And that could be something having to do with energy medicine, your diet. It could be meditation. It could be just being brave enough to acknowledge that it's there. But I think that with regard to like what you can do to like turn toward the storm or turn toward those places of challenge in your life, I think it really is not about leaving and going to work on yourself somewhere else, but actually sitting there in your life and understanding that everything is medicine. Everything that you have going on in your life is medicine. It can either be looked at as, like the difference between medicine and poison is dose, is something that a pharmacologist always tells me.
Mm-hmm.
So everything.
Dosage, right. Well, and part of what makes the dosage easier to take is time to digest it, so like taking time every day to digest life and to reflect on what lesson it has for you sounds like an extension of what you're saying.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
Creating the spaciousness so that you're
Yeah.
not right there. You're not right there like in the front row seat to kind of like be battered or have to be reactive to everything, but having that spaciousness so that you can be in intense situations but not let them get the better of you.
Yeah, beautifully said. If people are interested in checking out the book or the movie, the sacredscience.com is the best place to do that. Is that right?
Actually, if they want to go to the book, then if they go to the sacredscience.com/new book,
nice.
then they'll get a bunch of bonuses too. We've got a bunch of awesome bonus interviews and workshops that we're giving away as part of this new book launch. And if they want to see the movie, then they go to our website. You can go to our website, and you'll just see a button that says "Film," the Sacred Science website, and we are always offering it for free, so you can watch it now for free.
Fantastic. Nick, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a really fun conversation.
Yeah, likewise.
Thanks for listening today. For more episodes of A Healthy Curiosity, you can visit the iTunes store. If you appreciated today's show, please leave us a review. This helps other people to find the podcast. You could also head to BrodieWelch.com, where you can find free self-care resources, learn more about Chinese medicine, and let me know what you'd like to hear about on future episodes. I'd love to hear from you. Till next time, be good to yourself.